Our esteemed friend, Mr. John William Skay of Virginia City, walked into the office where we are sub-editor at a late hour last night with an expression of profound and heartfelt suffering upon his countenance, and, sighing heavily, laid the following item reverently upon the desk and walked slowly out again. He paused a moment at the door and seemed struggling to command his feelings sufficiently to enable him to speak, and then, nodding his head towards his manuscript, ejaculated in a broken voice, "Friend of mine, oh how sad," and burst into tears. We were so moved at his distress that we did not think to call him back and endeavor to comfort him until he was gone and it was too late. The paper had already gone to press, but knowing that our friend would consider the publication of this item important, and cherishing the hope that to print it would afford a melancholy satisfaction to his sorrowing heart, we stopped the press at once and inserted it in our columns. The item: distressing accident. Last evening about 6 o'clock, as Mr. William Schuler, an old and respectable citizen of South Park, was leaving his residence to go downtown, as has been his usual custom for many years, with the exception only of a short interval in the spring of 1850, during which he was confined to his bed by injuries received in attempting to stop a runaway horse by thoughtlessly placing himself directly in its wake and throwing up his hands and shouting, which, if he had done even a single moment sooner, must inevitably have frightened the animal still more instead of checking its speed, although disastrous enough for himself as it was, and rendered more melancholy and distressing by reason of the presence of his wife's mother, who was there and saw the sad occurrence, notwithstanding it is at least likely, though not necessarily so, that she should be reconnoitering in another direction when incidents occur, not being vivacious and on the lookout as a general thing, but even the reverse, as her own mother is said to have stated, who is by no means, but died in the full hope of a glorious resurrection upwards of 3 years ago, aged 86, being a Christian woman and without guile, as it were, or property in consequence of the fire of 1849, which destroyed every blasted thing she had in the world, but such is life. Let us all take warning by this solemn occurrence, and let us endeavor to conduct ourselves, that when we come to die we can do it. Let us place our hands upon our hearts, and say with earnestness and sincerity that from this day forth we will beware of the intoxicating bowl. First edition of the Californian. The boss editor has been in here raising the very mischief and tearing his hair and kicking the furniture about and abusing me like a pickpocket. He says that every time he leaves me in charge of the paper for half an hour, I get imposed upon by the first infant or the first idiot that comes along. And he says that distressing item of Johnny Skay's is nothing but a lot of distressing bosh, and has got no point to it, and no sense in it, and no information in it, and that there is no earthly necessity for stopping the press to publish it. He says every man he meets has insinuated that somebody about the Californian office has gone crazy. Now all this comes of being good-hearted. If I had been as unaccommodating and unsympathetic as some people, I would have told Johnny Skay that I wouldn't receive his communication at such a late hour and to go to blazes with it. But no, and his snuffling distress touched my heart, and I jumped at the chance of doing something to modify his misery. I never read his item to see whether there was anything wrong about it, but hastily wrote the few lines which preceded it, and sent it to the printers. And what has my kindness done for me? It has done nothing but bring down upon me a storm of abuse and ornamental blasphemy. Now I will just read that item myself and see if there is any foundation for all this fuss, and if there is, the author of it shall hear from me. Okay, I have read it, and I am bound to admit that it seems a little mixed at first glance. However, I will peruse it once more. I've read it again, and it does really seem a good deal more mixed than ever. Okay, I've read it over 5 times, but if I can get at the meaning of it, I wish I may get my just desserts. It won't bear analysis. There are things about it which I cannot understand at all. I don't say whatever became of William Schuller. It just says enough about him to get one interested in his career, and then drops him. Who is William Schuller anyhow, and what part of South Park did he live in? And if he started downtown at 6 o'clock, did he ever get there? And if he did anything happen to him? Is he the individual that met with a distressing accident? Considering the elaborate circumstantiality of detail observable in the item, it seems to me that it ought to contain more information than it does. On the contrary, it is obscure, and not only obscure, but utterly incomprehensible. Was the breaking of Mr. Schuller's leg 15 years ago the distressing accident that plunged Mr. Skay into unspeakable grief and caused him to come up here at dead of night and stop our press to acquaint the world with the unfortunate circumstance? Or did the distressing accident consist of the destruction of Schuller's mother-in-law's property in early times? Or did it consist in the death of that person herself 3 years ago, albeit it does not appear that she died by accident? In a word, what did that distressing accident consist in? What did that driveling ass of a Schuller stand in the wake of a runaway horse for, with his shouting and gesticulating, if he wanted to stop him? And how the mischief could he get run over by a horse that had already passed beyond him? And what are we to do to take warning? And how is this extraordinary chapter of incomprehensibilities going to be a lesson to us? And above all, what has the intoxicating bowl got to do with it anyhow? It is not stated that Schuller drank, or that his wife drank, or that his mother-in-law drank, or that the horse drank. Wherefore then the reference to the intoxicating bowl? It does seem to me that if Mr. Skay had let the intoxicating bowl alone himself, he would never have got into so much trouble with this infernal imaginary distressing accident. I have read this absurd item over and over again with all its insinuating plausibility until my head swims, but I can make neither head nor tail of it. There certainly seems to have been an accident of some kind or other, but it is impossible to determine what the nature of it was, or who was the sufferer by it. I do not like to do it, but I feel compelled to request that the next time anything happens to one of Mr. Skay's friends, he will append such explanatory notes to his account as it will enable me to find out what sort of accident it was and whom it happened to. I had rather all his friends should die than I should be driven to the verge of lunacy again in trying to cipher out the meaning of another such production as the above.